Here now to talk more about this weekend's primaries and the upcoming Super Tuesday is political historian Rich Rubino. Thank you so much for joining us here on Scripps News. So first, Trump has dominated the primary so far. Nikki Haley not getting out of the race yet. She's still looking to snag any win on Super Tuesday. Which states do you think she has the best chance of winning? Are there any? What do you think are going to be the interesting places to watch Super Tuesday?
I guess theoretically the District of Columbia. I guess just because that has a very liberal constituency, even within the Republican Party, they're a lot more moderate. And there are very few actual voters. Think about how many voters are actually going to be voting in a Republican primary in the District of Columbia. I think when it comes to actual Super Tuesday, I think she has an outside shot at Vermont. She has Governor Phil Scott, the incumbent Republican governor, is endorsing her there. Vermont is very much, it was actually one of the third best states last time around for Joe Biden, so it's really not a traditional Republican state. Massachusetts, I would say she has an outside shot at taking. But then again, there's so few, just because there are so few voters in the Massachusetts primary. And I guess American Samoa is always kind of the wild card, right? Michael Bloomberg last time around, that was the one place, all the money that he spent, the one victory he had was in American Samoa. So that can kind of be an outlier. But those would be the only ones that I think to have a potential chance. But for her, I don't think winning is actually necessarily the goal. I think just getting within 10 points in some of these states would be a victory for her.
And what do you think is the point for her to stay in at this point in the race? Because it doesn't seem like there's any clear path for her to get the nomination. But why do you think she's hanging around?
There are all these different theories. I mean, one of them is that she's trying to meet as many donors and potentially for 2028, particularly if Donald Trump loses the presidential election, then Republicans would be saying, why did we lose this election? Well, look who the second place person was. Maybe we should have nominated her. And maybe they would want to go back to her vision, the status quo ante, I call it, of the Republican Party from Eisenhower to Mitt Romney. For Trump very much transmogrified the Republican base. And she could be doing it because, generally speaking, the person who sometimes comes in second, I call it the primogenitor theory in the Republican Party, sometimes will come in first in the next presidential election. If you think about it, George H.W. Bush came in second in 1980 to Ronald Reagan. 1980, he was the nominee. Bob Dole came in second to him. He becomes the nominee. John McCain came in second to George W. Bush. Then he becomes the nominee. So Republicans do tend to sometimes fall in line, and the person that comes in second place sometimes will garner the nomination the next time around.
I think that's interesting, and it does seem like she could be playing the long game here, looking even further ahead than this year's election. Now, since you're a political historian, we always love to ask you history questions. We talk about the historical significance of Super Tuesday and why there's been so much focus on this day. Obviously, a lot of delegates up for grabs, but why is this day so important historically?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the 1970s, but it was really a brainchild of the Democratic Party. The Democrats in 1984 had their convention in San Francisco, and Gene Kirkpatrick, who became a UN ambassador in the Reagan administration, a former Hubert Humphrey Democrat, got up and made fun of San Francisco Democrats. So a bunch of Democrats got together, and they were moderate Democrats, and they were looking for a plan for 1988 so that they would get a more moderate Southern candidate. And Al Gore was their candidate. Al Gore at the time was was a moderate to conservative Democrat. There are others like Sam Nunn who were thinking about it. The problem was, so they put a lot of Southern states together. The problem was that Jesse Jackson was also running that year, and Jesse Jackson split the vote with Al Gore. But that was basically their strategy. By 1992, Bill Clinton lost Iowa, lost New Hampshire. He lost both of the two first states. Then he ended up winning in Georgia, and then their strategy worked because a lot of those Southern states ended up voting for Bill Clinton over Paul Tsongas and Jerry Brown that time around, and they got the moderate Southerner that they wanted, and that moderate Southerner actually put Al Gore on the ticket, ironically enough, and they were able to win the presidency for the first time in 12 years.
Really interesting historical look there. Now, I want to ask you about independent voters because that's become a bigger part of the conversation in the last couple of elections. Will you talk about the independent voter in many states is excluded from primaries? So do you really think we're getting an accurate picture of what voters want in, say, the general election through this primary because maybe a lot of independent voters aren't able to really take part?
Yeah, no, political parties are somewhat like private clubs in that they can, in some states they can exclude people who are independents from voting in that party. What you what you usually have in a political party is that the primaries tend the primaries tend to nominate candidates now who are more far left or far right. Both parties, I think, in terms of, if you're looking at it from a purely cold, calculated, strategic position, you want someone that's more in the center, because that person in a general election can galvanize the support of the center and can bring in more voters, even some crossover voters. The problem with candidates right now, like Donald Trump and Joe Biden, is that they have very little appeal beyond their own parties. In 2020, 94% of Democrats voted for Joe Biden. Contrary-wise, 94% of Republicans voted for Donald Trump. So in the general election, so we're in this scenario right now where when Democrats vote Democrat, Republicans vote Republican. Believe it or not, it didn't used to be that way. It used to be, for example, that there were, like in 1964, for example, Barry Goldwater was winning states like Alabama and Mississippi as the Republican presidential nominee, but they had overwhelmingly Democratic congressional delegations, governors, everything else. Now, essentially, we've just become so ideologically homogenized that Democrats are Democrats, Republicans are Republicans, and independents kind of have to pick up the pieces.
Yeah, it'll be certainly interesting to see where those voters fall come November and come Super Tuesday. This is the biggest day we've had this election season so far. Political historian Rich Rubino, thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Thank you so much for having me on.